So don't.
Thank you. Okay, I know that I'm between you and drinks. Luckily, my talk is short and I think fun. I'll let you judge that. But today I'm going to talk about community because I really do think it's a key element of developer relations, and doing the right thing for your community can have a pretty big impact on what developers think of you. So I have spent the past 20 years working in various technical community and mostly developer relations roles focused on primarily open source software. So I recently decided to take a little break from working and go back to school to get a PhD. So these days I'm mostly doing research focused on understanding Linux kernel developers and looking at how competitors collaborate together within the Linux kernel. Despite the accent, I am based here in London. Sadly, the PhD reading, they just stacks and stacks of academic papers to read, has really cut into my 73 books a year, which is what I used to do. And I know this because I'm a little OCD about it, and I keep a list. So you can check it out if you want to know what I've read. I'll start with Doctor Who, because it's one of my favorites. On the surface, the TARDIS looks like a simple blue police box. It's small, should fit maybe a single person, nothing special, nothing particularly extraordinary, until you open the door, right? What can you really tell about the community by just observing it from the outside? So on the surface, you might see a forum, a few mailing lists, maybe IRC or Slack channels, code repositories, bug trackers, that sort of thing. But until you actually get into that community and begin participating, you won't understand what it's really like in that community. Now, the box itself is indeed pretty cool, but the real magic actually lies with the people, both people inside and outside of the box. Communities have leaders, not unlike the Doctor, people who help, like his companions, but communities are always changing, so sometimes you get a new companion, or the Doctor takes a new form. And the box itself might not change, but things will definitely be very different on the inside. And if those new leaders are good, the community will continue to thrive, continue to flourish, not unlike how Doctor Who has flourished despite, a dozen or so different doctors. And at each stop, the Doctor meets some strange and interesting new people. Especially for those of us that work in open source communities, I've met all kinds of strange and interesting people over the years. And ultimately, it's not about the leaders, right? It's about all of these people who participate in your communities. Now, H.G. Wells' time machine, the time traveler, was an inventor, he was a scientist. He went forward 800,000 years in time during his first trip. He finds that humanity's completely changed. He manages to have his time machine stolen, and he has to fight to get it back. And getting it back is made really, really difficult because he really has no understanding of what humanity is like at this point in time. Now, this is like being new in a community. So when you don't understand the norms and you don't understand how people participate, you're likely to make really huge mistakes that can be quite difficult actually to recover from. My last job when I joined Puppet Labs, since I wasn't an active community member already, I made sure that people knew that first month I really wasn't going to do anything publicly in the community. What I was going to do was spend a lot of time talking to people and understanding how the community functioned. And I started doing some behind-the-scenes things that I could do to make the community better over time. But then I started participating more. But I did it gradually. And I've seen too many people, they sort of come storming into a community without understanding what it's like, and then they end up just making either one gigantic mistake or a lot of very small mistakes. So start small, understand what's going on, learn from a couple of your smaller mistakes, and grow your participation over time. Nobody wants to be the red shirt, right? That person, poor person, beaming down on that away mission with Kirk, Spock, and other important people. The one who gets easily killed off and nobody is going to notice by the next show, the next episode. So if you disappear out of the community tomorrow, would anyone notice? So they will, if you're participating and contributing on a pretty regular basis. And so find some way to contribute to the community doing something that people find valuable. I also recommend, if you haven't read John Scalzi's Red Shirts, to read that. It's an interesting look at what it would be like to be a red shirt in real life. So I recommend that. Time enough for love is about Lazarus Long. He's 2,000 years old. He's a cynical old fart who is not afraid to share his many opinions. One of these is that a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet. It goes on and on like that for a bit. It ends with specialization is for insects. So the best community members, and I would argue community managers, along with developer relations professionals, are the ones who can help the community out in a wide variety of ways. So while we do need people with some special skills, obviously, it's really nice to have people that you can count on who will step in and just do almost anything that needs to be done. So these are the people who will answer questions on the mailing list or IRC, they'll help out with bugs, they'll submit patches, write documentation, organize user groups and events, speak at conferences about the project and the technologies, and then just step in to help out with anything else that the community needs. And so these flexible, get it done types are incredibly valuable to have in your community. Asimov created the 3 laws so that he could write stories that went against the robot stereotype of his time. So he set the Frankenstein pattern, where robots turned on their creators and destroyed people. He found that to be a bit tedious. He wanted to write about a different kind of robot. Now, many of us find communities full of people acting like jerks to be tedious and annoying as well, and Asimov's 3 laws set the expectations for his robots. Not unlike our communities have code of conduct, which we mentioned in a number of presentations earlier, or guidelines for participation that are designed to help people understand what is and is not appropriate. And the guidelines evolve over time, the way Asimov's laws have. So they've taken various forms over the years, slightly different variations in different books, with the biggest change probably being the addition of the 0th law that he wanted to put in before the 3 laws to avoid robots harming humanity as a whole. But in communities, the guidelines often change to handle new issues, new problems, new technologies. Do androids dream of electric sheep, which was also the basis for the movie Blade Runner, androids evolved to become so close to human that it becomes very difficult to tell them apart. And one of the ways that they can tell for most androids is by testing their empathy responses. So don't act like an android. I talked about the guidelines. Honestly, where most people get in trouble with community guidelines is when they really don't take the time to think about how their actions impact other people, and just fail to show empathy for the other people that they're talking to. So show empathy for people, your interactions in the community will improve, become more positive. And if you don't show empathy for other people, a bounty hunter or someone else in the community, like a community manager, might track you down, might not be pleasant. Maybe we don't want to go quite as far as the Borg. Resistance is probably not futile, and we won't assimilate you against your will. But as far as communities are concerned, we really do want your biological and technological distinctiveness to be added to our own. New people and new ideas are what keep communities strong. But you also have to be careful not to assimilate too many people too quickly. You need time for people to get absorbed into your culture. And if you add too many people at once, what can happen is you can actually end up destroying your community culture. And in most cases, we really do want to gradually add people and assimilate them along with their ideas and their technologies, along with our culture. And so these new people do bring, a lot of life into the community and can be a pretty great source of help. We also don't want to go quite as far as Big Brother, right? But we do want to have metrics, and we want to measure what's happening in our community. So that's been a common theme, I think, throughout the day. But having great metrics helps you track progress and identify issues. But it should also help you recognize your top community members and your top contributors. So I see too many examples of community metrics that are just focused on the numbers. But communities are really all about people, right? So your community metrics should help you find your top contributors across various parts of your community. And while I don't blindly use those numbers to recognize people, the metrics often lead me to notice somebody who has done something recently, which leads to some type of recognition. And I have a particular passion for metrics. so, feel free to chat me up about it afterwards at the drink up. Frankenstein is probably the original science fiction book. It was written in 1818, before science fiction was really a thing. And in the beginning, the Frankenstein creation was not the monster that people assumed he was, given his hideous monster-like appearance. But he didn't become a monster until people started treating him like one. And just because someone has different ideas within the community doesn't make them a bad person. This is important. This is where it's really important to make sure that we focus on the ideas and not the person making them. So we can debate ideas without attacking the person who made those, who has those ideas. And there really is nothing quite like an internet lynch mob to encourage people to stay as far away from the project as possible. So avoiding that is pretty cool. The idea behind the highlighter movie is that there can be only one immortal left at the end of the gathering, and this one immortal left becomes all powerful. So despite the fact that there can be only one of these immortals left at the end, the older immortals still mentor the newer ones, and they train them to participate in the gathering. So they mentor other immortals, knowing that if the student actually surpasses the teacher, that it could actually mean the death of the mentor. Luckily, the people we mentor aren't likely to kill us off. And since we are not immortal, it is even more important for us to train the next generation to eventually take our place. And those of us that have been working in communities and developer relations for ages have probably made lots of mistakes. I certainly have. And by mentoring others, we can help them learn from our mistakes and help them be more successful with maybe a little less pain than it takes some of us to get there. So unlike Ender's Game, where Battle School is filled with kids, we often actually don't know the ages of the people that we participate with. There's a great story in Carl Vogel's book, Producing Open Source Software, where there was this person, he had submitted lots of bug reports, and he finally submitted his first code contribution. So they sent him a little legal paperwork, said, just have your company sign this, just make sure that, they're okay with you contributing this code. It's like, well, I don't really have a company. They were like, oh, no problem, have your university sign it. It's like, well, I know my parents sign it, I'm 13, maybe that would work. And so here's this person who had been participating in this community for a significant period of time that nobody had any idea was a relatively young kid. Linus Torvalds, when he started Linux, he was 22. At a Usenix conference a few years ago, I saw a presentation from Kyla Banks, who's an 11-year-old, at the time she was an 11-year-old web designer and programmer who's using a lot of open source tools. She actually keynoted OSCON this year at the age of 13, which I find tremendously impressive. She's quite a bright young girl. But we need to encourage these people to get involved and do whatever we can to help make them be successful. Now, let's face it, Starbuck really could probably kick the ass of just about anyone in this room. Battlestar Galactica was filled with strong, capable, talented women as the president, captains, fighter pilots, a few Cylons. And you can start by encouraging young women to get involved in technical communities and help them get started by mentoring them. So we also need more women speaking at technology events. So I did a great job with this one, for example. But it's incredibly difficult. So that's something that was talked about in a number of the talks earlier. And I know that I haven't always succeeded. But it's important that we do as much as we possibly can to make these women successful in our communities. In Dune, the people who controlled the spice, Melange, controlled the world. They even had control over space travel, since space travel itself depended on people who were using the spice. And this led to continued power struggles and eventual overthrow of those in power. And communities can have similar issues, right? When a person or a group of people attempt to exert too much control. So you need to maintain a balance between keeping things sane and productive on the one hand, and without trying to control every aspect of the community. While I may not get to travel off-world like I did so often in Stargate, my work in communities and developer relations has actually given me opportunities to travel around the world. One of the main goals of the Stargate program was to obtain alien technologies and learn new ways to use them to advance our own technologies. So while I don't get to play with cool alien technologies like those really awesome personal force fields some of the Guo would have, by actively participating in community communities, you learn new ways of doing things, right? You get exposed to new technologies. You can even have, super long debates with people about which approach is better. So you can't beat a good packaging debate on a mailing list. And maybe because instead of working in open source, as I mentioned earlier, I've met all kinds of interesting people. And by working on projects with people around the world, I can actually travel to most locations and find someone that I know to meet up with, which is pretty cool. At first, being invisible seems pretty awesome. But the invisible man quickly realizes that there are actually quite a few challenges. You can't carry anything with you because people see it floating around in the air and they kind of freak out. So you can't carry any money. It's also really cold when you aren't wearing any clothes. Community management and developer relations are also, as all of you know, not as easy as it seems at first glance. So I often see people underestimating how difficult it is and how much of a challenge it is. So these are the people who think that it's mostly traveling to conferences, buying people beer, getting to hang out with people, and I'll admit that yes, I've gotten to do a lot of all of those things, and that's pretty great. But I'm also the one who has to kick someone out of the community when their behavior is inappropriate. I'm the one that people escalate problems to, regardless of where that problem is happening across the community or across the project. And the public face of the project when something goes horribly, terribly wrong. And fortunately, I've developed thick skin that it's, I still love the work despite the challenges. We all know that the Hitchhiker's Guide supplanted Encyclopedia Galactica, partly because it was slightly cheaper, but it also has the words "Don't Panic" in large, friendly letters on the cover, which is always good advice. In communities, things will go wrong. Spammers, flame wars, debates that maybe get a little bit too interesting. But it will not be as bad as someone destroying the Earth to build a hyperspatial expressway through our solar system. So keep things in perspective. Maybe bring a towel with you just in case. Then you can calmly recover from whatever the problem was without freaking out. And when in doubt, the answer is 42. Thanks.